I'd like to welcome you all. My name is Anne Stephen. I'm the Senior Curator of Art here at the Chak Museum. I'd like to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora land on... I don't know whether this is... I was just acknowledging the Gadigal people of the Eora land on whose land we work and play. And there are two tiny fish hooks just in that case, on the front of that case, which come from the Sydney language group. And they're one of the very few material cultural remains of that original Sydney people. So they're very precious to us. But back to why we're here today, the Penelope Gallery opened a couple of years back. We've had 4 artists work on installations. The first artist was Daniel Boyd, who did a wonderful pediment impediment, and there's the central element of his exhibition is out on this level on the bridge. That's indigenising the Acropolis. The second artist was Sarah Goffman, who made a magnificent chinoiserie mimicry of many works in our collection. The third and most recent were Dee and Kate Harding, which was a show that Hannah Matthews curated from Monash. And if you're not familiar with Dee's work, there's some magnificent examples along Eastern Avenue at the City Road end, which was commissioned 2018. But today, we're very, very privileged to have one of our own, Mikala Dwyer, here today, who sadly works now in Melbourne at RMIT, where she's Professor of Art. But for many of you, you would have known her either at the University of Western Sydney or here, or not quite here, but in Rozelle at SCA. So we're incredibly delighted to have you come to the Chak Wing and do the installation. And I'm personally very in debt to Toni Ross, who when I was away stepped into the brink and worked with Mikala to curate this Penelope and the Seahorse. Turn to my notes. Many of you would also know Toni, who is now Honorary Senior Lecturer at the Faculty of Arts, Design and Architecture, Sydney, but also you would probably know her as the Sydney Reviewer for Artforum. So we're delighted to have you as the interlocutor with Mikala. I think that's probably all I have to say, other than after their conversation, I'd encourage you, if you haven't already been at the installation, to visit Penelope and the Seahorse on level 2, and then, it's a new museum. And then if you're able to join us for a drink, we've got a pay bar on level 2 on the terrace. So if you could welcome Mikala and Toni, they're going to come up and talk here. Thank you very much.
So just before we start the conversation, which I think will be more of a Q&A, as I have a huge list of questions for Mikala, and I think it's best if she does most of the talking. But I want to make a slight disclaimer about the curating title. I contributed a small amount to this show. I did some research and wrote some copy for it, but it was really a joint effort with the wonderful staff here, Katrina Liberiu and Luke Parker and Anne too, participated, so they did a great job. So to start, Mikala.
I just want to say thanks to that lot too.
Yeah.
Yes, it takes a village. Thank you.
Okay, so it's called Penelope and the Seahorse, which sounds a little like the title of a children's book, but well, there's a lot more going on than that. And I know that one of the initial ideas was to work off the word hippocampus, which is the genus name of the seahorse. Apparently its origins come from the ancient Greek, and it's a compound term meaning horse plus sea monster. But the show isn't just about the seahorse hippocampus. There's references to the hippocampus, which is a structure in the brain, in the mammalian brain. So not just humans have two hippocampi, but other mammals do, I think. And also there are references to mythologies of the ancient world, with some fabulous artefacts from the Nicholson Museum referencing those mythologies from ancient Greek and Roman culture. But I want to start with the seahorse, hopefully not get bogged down with the seahorse. But so what stimulated your interest in this unusual fish?
I think just in the beginning days of talking, yeah, like that. Is that all right? In the beginning days, talking with Anne, we were talking about all sorts of things marine, like all the sands around the coast of Australia was in the collection, and we just sort of started on the geology department. It's a feast of wonders in Sydney University, and part of the joy of being invited to show here is that you are invited also to consider the various collections and and play with them. And just, Anne and I have a long relationship, and she's one of those fabulous curators that lets you meander in your thinking. And so we started with sand and rocks, and then we ended up with a seahorse. And I think the seahorse came out of, I think there's a marine scientist here sort of researching, in particular, the Sydney seahorse that has been on the edge of extinction. And so that got me thinking, because I've been doing a series of work on animals, projections, so possums, pigeons, koalas, and now the seahorse. I collaborate with a friend in Melbourne. She's an amazing animator, Gina Moore. So the seahorse kind of took hold, and it's because it is such a weird creature, and the male gives birth to the babies, amongst many other strange traits it has. And it was a starting point, but it then went kind of off on another tangent. But also, I'd just like to invite you to, if you want to interrupt at any point and ask questions, I really think it's better to ask questions when they're in your head rather than letting them sort of freeze till the end, then we might not have time at the end. But if you want to interrupt, I love being interrupted. So anyway, that was the starting point.
Okay, and I think you've been quoted in some of the publicity as saying that the seahorse has great symbolic resonance, and I wonder if you could talk a little bit about some of that.
Yeah, I think the seahorse has, I think it kind of has a sense of magic and symbolic resonance because it has that, long history and a sort of vaguely mythological character that is, sea monster. It also was the horses of the sea were the ones that carried Poseidon's chariot through the oceans, and Poseidon sort of then came in as another character in this installation, and Poseidon is also known as Earth Shaker. So there's lots of, I guess, thinking around the mythologies, and the seahorse has a sort of presence across many mythologies. And
I mean, I've read recently that one of the most recent symbolisations of the seahorse is a feminist one. Yeah. So it's become a feminist symbol because it reverses normal animal kingdom reproductive roles. But also it's very popular. This doesn't really come up in the show, but there are hints in the show that the seahorse is perhaps endangered, or that those large chunks of plastic floating around in the space and so on. But I've also read that it's part of traditional Chinese medicine, and is a popular ingredient in both China and in Japan. And as with a lot of these things, the seahorse can cure a myriad of illnesses, but one of them is it's been described as a form of natural Viagra, so that it's a cure for male impotence, but also for asthma, heart disease, bedwetting, all of these different things. I just think it's interesting that these qualities are applied to an animal in this way, these capacities. And I just wondered what you thought of that, about that.
Yeah, it's a strange creature. And then again, we name the little parts of the brain, the hippocampi, named after the seahorse because it's a similar shape. And you know, it's the hippocampi is that bit in the back of the brain. There's two of them, and they're quite. They look quite symmetrical, but they have quite different functions, and they kind of do a similar thing with memory and creating fictions, both future fiction and past memories, and spatial mapping and also social mapping. They're quite complex processing parts of the brain. And I guess this relationship to the seahorse, why we make symbols, why we make, and often why does symmetry sort of play such a strong part in the formation of symbols. And I'm trying to get back to your question.
You don't have to.
Yeah, I think,
Yeah. So the seahorse is also it's described as a spirit animal. So there are these sites on the web, sort of new agey sites, and again, the seahorse. People can adopt seahorses as their spirit animal, and again, the qualities associated with it are so numerous.
Go on.
Yeah, but to get on to the appearance of seahorses in the show, so you've done this, a fabulous video with Gina Moore, and also seahorse shapes appear in other works in the show, I think in the paintings. And I just wondered, with the video animation, and it has a sound component as well, which it'd be good to speak about, what effect were you looking for in the representation of the seahorses in the video?
It's interesting because there's actually no seahorses in the show.
No, not real ones.
It's a phantom of a seahorse. So these two seahorses are completely deep fake, built out of geometry. Sad. It's very sad. They're they're like an apparition that's come from the future to stand in for seahorses that might be lost. So I guess they're they're holding a space of loss, in my mind anyway. So they're holding a kind of, the way a ghost would come and visit and, remind you or carry knowledge from one period of time to another, the way cultural knowledge can be passed on through, ancestral spirits and seahorse spirits. Sorry, what was the question again?
What effects were you looking for? So obviously
sound,
they're not natural science specimens, or they're not obviously realistic specimens.
Yeah, no, but the sound is actually from actual seahorses.
Yeah.
So the recording is sourced off the internet. So it's got, I haven't gone out into the field and recorded seahorses, but you can actually find these things. So they really, I've tried to create an atmosphere that is a combination of interweaving stories of both the site of the Penelope Gallery, and why it's titled Penelope is because it's named after Penelope Seidler, an amazing woman that I have great admiration for, but it's also the name of Penelope in mythology, who wove and unwove her weavings every night as she was waiting for Odysseus and tried to ward off the suitors. She kept saying, I'll marry again when I just finish this cloak or whatever she was working on. But, it was a strategy to buy time and also, locating it. There's nothing surreal in this show for me. It's very real for me. I'm not trying to evoke something particularly fantastical. I'm trying to sort of create a very real emotion of loss, I guess. So for all its ideas of apparition and mythologies and things that are intangible, I'm trying to kind of pull that into a very physical and real space and, on site, in the gallery, in relationship to the whole museum, in a sense of the whole memory that is held in artefacts, in the matter of objects in the whole museum across time. Amazing, like as Anne opened with this Gaddical artefacts here, the importance of that matter and how it holds memory. So it's sort of trying to sort of talk across all these things. I've gone off on a tangent, sorry.
No, you haven't. So, it's like really almost like a congregation of memories, I think, from history and so on. And not the kind of collecting of memory or history that one would expect in a history book, for example.
Yeah.
It's all mixed up, but it's also beautifully brought together in the end, I think. Just if I could go back briefly to the brain hippocampi, the paintings are made of, they're geometric shapes, but rather softened ones, very colourful, almost like a patchwork around them. But the main shapes are two mirroring images of what actually looks like a tadpole to me. But in fact it is the shape of the brain hippocampi, which doesn't actually look like a seahorse. I think it's more like a blob at one end and a curled tail like a seahorse. And in fact, I gather the anatomist in the 16th century, I think, who named the seahorse hippocampus, started with silkworm rather than seahorse, but the seahorse stuck in the end. So back to the painting. And so there's a big circle. There's a creation of a big circle in the middle and the two brain shapes, brain hippocampi shapes on either side. Can you just talk about what you're thinking there?
It's also a corner.
Yes, it is.
So, to sort of weave it in with everything else. It's, you know, painting is it's an activity from, I guess, the imagination, from the brain, from the memory, from, you know, I'm trying to weave it all in together so that you are walking into sort of some actual memory making kind of space or something, so that the painting is like a void in the corner that is, you know, I sort of think of it as a reference back to the anchor, which is the Neptune's trident on the floor, which is, you know, it's a blue circle. It's a void. It's, it's the sort of corner, the centre of the corner there, or it's a symbol for me. It's a symbol of, say, Neptune floating around in a grid of soft squares and colours that, with these wafty kind of hippocampi holding it in play. So it's, grid is another kind of mapping tool that crosses over to the weaving. It's a very loose...
Well, there are so many connections between the works. So I guess looking at them in the singular is perhaps not entirely the right way to go. But as usual in your work, there's a conversation between all of the works. The Seahorse Hotel, which is an upended shopping trolley, hanging suspended from the ceiling, and it looks as though you've crafted a seahorse head or shape out of plastic, and it looks to me as though it's trapped in the trolley.
Or it's trapping the trolley.
Or it's trapping the trolley. And
I think it looks like it's eaten the trolley.
Right, and it's got the Seahorse Hotel sign, neon sign hanging on it.
Or happy ending sign. Sleazy Seahorse Hotel.
And another component of the show is the vitrine with the selected relics from the Nicholson Museum, and also some little bronze objects you had made, that actually the way they're crafted, they look like relics you'd dig up anyway. They're roughly crafted and so on. Can you tell me a bit about the ancient world objects in the vitrine? Why did you choose those particular ones?
I think I was just looking for objects that kind of pulled out more of the connections between symbols and mythologies like Poseidon and the kind of a aquatic marine world, that ancient world, sea country.
Yeah.
But playing, I guess, across. So the way that when you put things in a vitrine, they become very erratic and, they're out of your reach and they become like holy relics. But by playing with them in this way, I was trying to sort of, and pulling them into relationship with other things that aren't so sort of historically precious, perhaps, that you perhaps create something that's less artefact. Like I always think, try to liven them up a bit, so that I think we get very bogged down in valuing artefacts to the point in sacrificing a sort of more living way of, using or considering objects. So anyway, I was, it's a mix. So you've got the Starbucks cups that have the Skilla, the sea monster on it, that's become quite domesticated, as you were saying before. And there, we just had the security guard come over when we were standing down there to say that we couldn't have those cups up on the perspex. Very bad and very dangerous. Sort of coffee cup alert.
Yes,
I was with the curator because she could sort of assure him that it was the work. It does stabilise that a little bit, I thought that he was disturbed on the top, that he...
Yes, it's a wonderful contrast between the Starbucks coffee cup or drink cup, plastic drink cups, with that emblem of Scylla, who's a sea monster from the Odyssey, I think, Homer's Odyssey. And there's an urn, in a funerary urn, that was probably one of the larger objects in the vitrine from the collection. It's the most amazingly wild image. It's a woman with octopus legs. It's a relief. And she's wielding this massive oar as though she's going to, decapitate someone.
She probably
and then
was,
you've got the Starbucks emblem on the cup, and it's this pretty little Scylla, with decorative
her legs have been amputated,
curling up like
if you could see
ringlets and so on. Yeah. So it's a lovely contrast.
So just to, I guess, show that these symbols carry across time in the weirdest places. This sort of longevity of symbols is really curious. Like when we're all long gone and dead, like there'll still be symbols floating around.
Yeah.
Or mythologies.
Can you say a little? You mentioned it before, but could you say a little more about the weaving? Which is a found weaving, I gather, is it?
No.
Or you actually...
I've gone to great care in unravelling that. That took me a long time.
And it's all undone at the bottom and falling apart and being unwoven, basically, which was your contribution to the Hessian. I think you painted a little of it as well. But can you just tell us your thoughts about that work?
I think that was just also to locate it back to Penelope, but also as a sense of unweaving and a seemingly unreasonable action after you've done a whole lot of weaving, that you would unravel it, but to buy time. I guess it's pull something apart is kind of, I guess it's, to create and then to rip it apart. It's what we do in everything. We build and then we destroy it. And I guess, and I wanted that materiality of the Hessian to kind of tie into the materiality of the cords that hold the plastic, and then that all the materials are on a sort of equal playing field in some way or shape or form. I'm wondering if anybody wants to ask questions. You might all fall asleep otherwise. Does anybody have any questions? No. Yeah. Yeah, no, it's a hard one. Yeah, I guess the Seahorse was sort of my animal spirit the whole way through, testing me, guiding me, telling me that looked really crap the whole way through, and just not to try and represent a seahorse, copy a seahorse, leave it to my fabulous animator, Gina Moore, because she could do it much better. But I guess the Seahorse was just a sort of like a weaving point. It's like the weaving is there as also a model of thinking in terms of trying to not necessarily weaving but unweaving as much as unravelling as a way of connecting things that aren't necessarily connectable, and the Seahorse was there, I guess, as a thread to come in and out of, but also and the way it would go into hippocampi and the brain structures and the shapes, and then geometry, and then the void, extinction, death, loss. Can we die better? It keep coming back to the seahorse. It's, why the materials? Sorry. Yeah. Well, what do you think of with bronze? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it started off with wax. Yeah, it's like... Yeah. Yes, yeah. Trying to... Yeah. Yeah. It's a lot of modelling though. Okay, underlying it is modelling. Is just my go-to with a lot of things. I'm not a there's two types of artists. There's carvers and there's modellers. Actually, yeah, kind of. Yeah, I think I can't quite own being a painter yet. I think of my paintings as sort of somehow built, sculpted. I'm such a bad painter. I just can't. But the modelling of the wax and the clay, and the wax was really difficult because it actually isn't soft and malleable. You've got to heat it up and it sets really fast, and you've got to work fast. And I actually had never done it before, and so there's all these contingencies. But sometimes I think that the quicker you work with something you don't know, sometimes you capture some kind of animal spirit or something. I don't know, you're thinking about a seahorse, and I was really surprised looking at them when they came out finished that actually some of them looked like seahorses, because I was trying to also sculpt the brain. So it's like this brain-hand moment where you're trying to get a shape. It's not really a seahorse, it's not really a bit of the brain, but it's something that will carry a feeling to someone else. So there's a psychic transfer somehow of one thing. So to me, the material, it's about a kind of psychic transfer of materiality. So moving from one to the other, to me, they're all one somehow. They're all like the plastic is like the bronze, like the wax, and the way I work with Gina, we work together, like there's a sort of modelling of each other's thinking and ideas, and we talk together and I go, no, I don't want it like that. She goes, oh, but there's a modelling of thinking. So there's modelling, and the materiality is something that is modelable, I guess. Does that make sense?
I just wanted to ask about, when you're working with...
Oh, hello. Yeah.
all these intentions and mythological kind of stuff in that. Do you feel how do you feel when you connect with your own stuff, and if you're in that context where you've got all this richness, does that kind of feed you and change the way?
Yeah, I think when you're in that mode of making or something, you start to work with these objects and you think, oh, someone did the same thing with that. There was a modelling process or a painting or there's some hand there's that sort of transfer that's still resonant all the way to now. It's incredible to be able to work with these objects because they really, I can see why we fetishize them, because they are extraordinary. But also what's extraordinary is just that they've lasted so long. Does that answer that? Yeah. I started off really intensive workshop in Melbourne that we were invited to do a public art proposal with Melbourne City Council and another artist, Sean Lynch from Ireland, and I were invited, and we had this incredible 2-week workshop, like really sort of looking at site, city Melbourne, but around these parks, and like talking to Aboriginal elders, talking to scientists, environmental scientists. Like we even got a tour of the Doherty Virology Lab, which was in the area, and philosophers and poets and all sorts of people were invited to this 2-week kind of intensive, which it was a radical new kind of model for public art. Like normally, you know, you get invited to put in a proposal and it's kind of a plonker that comes after a sort of vicious competition. And whereas this one was like, they didn't want anything from us for about a year. Like they just gave us all this like food for thought in this intensive and sent us off for a year to kind of think about it and really develop a deep relationship to the site. And, you know, after talking to a lot of people and having sort of conversations with both the environmental scientists and the Aboriginal elders and other stakeholders in this particular park, I sort of ended up gravitating towards, I came up with this really sort of dumb, simple idea after, you know, a lot of time, but I just couldn't shake it, and it was a possum. I just wanted to have a possum in the tree as a projection, which so simple, but it was so complicated, as you know. It was demanded lots of big lifters and, you know, crews of people and weird, you know, expensive projection units, and a very simple idea got very complicated. It was a public artwork that was only seen sometimes at night. You know, it was quite different. Like it was just something you catch out of the corner of your eye. It wasn't in your face. These 2 projections of possums that would come at night, off and on. And it sort of, the information about this work was sort of transferred by kind of gossip or rumour, and often through the Mandarin community, speaking community, which we'd sort of set up a kind of gossip with through social media, student, because it was a student area. And it was a whole thing about this problem of the possums inhabiting this site and having the trees were dying and trying to move them on. There's a whole lot of possums trying to save them, and then environmental scientists trying to cull them. And so that's where it started with these projections and this working with creating animals. It was in lockdown, so I couldn't go and film possums. So I thought, oh, we'll make a possum, which in the end seemed more appropriate. Does that make sense? Is that what, did I go off track? Yeah, so then it became the possums, and then it morphed into a koala, and that was sort of after the bushfires and all the koalas were getting wiped out. So it was sort of about creating these ghosts and these apparitions that would haunt us. And then, yeah, there's one in Surrey Hills on the corner of Riley and Crown, I think. I think that's where it is. It's on a building though. It's not a projection. It's a LED. I haven't actually seen it yet myself either. But and then there was a pigeon as well. Done a pigeon. So they're not necessarily animals that are extinct yet, but they're, you know, so it's a sort of play in time, future and
They're not
past.
traditionally charismatic animals either.
I like them.
I do too. Are there any other questions?
Oh yeah, so the sound was, you know, I worked, you know, it really does take a village, and it always makes better work when you work with other people. So Gina and I work with a composer, James Hayes, down in Melbourne, who always brings something different, you know, like we collaborate together, and we wanted this. We'd worked on a previous work with birds, and this it was quite heavily treated, and the soundtrack, whereas this one we started work on this, and the sounds are so weird and strange and lovely that it's quite naturalist. So there, the sound is the sound of the seahorse when he's, or she and he, I think, are sort of mating or want to mate. And the other sound, there's a sort of a shushy kind of gravelly sound. That's the sound when they're stressed. It's sort of like a growling sound. So there's these two sounds that are playing off each other, and it's a very odd sound. I played it over and over again to see whether it would get irritating and people get sick of it, but I just found it really mesmerising, and the knock knock sound has a sort of timbre that is quite otherworldly. It's just not. It could be knocking on wood, but it's not. It's just such a special sound, and yeah. Does that answer that one?
What I noticed about the audio, which, as you say, is quite mesmerising and not annoying at all, the growling, and it is described as growling, I think, in the literature. It actually sounded more like the beating of wings to me, and the knocking. That doesn't sound like knocking, or does it? Maybe it does sound like knocking.
Sort of it's a funny sound. You can go and listen to it.
Yeah, but it's seahorse vocals, definitely.
Yeah.
So I think we might call it a day.
Unless you've got any other questions. I think you've all been wonderfully generous in your questions. Thank you.
And enjoy the show and drinks.
Drinks on the terrace.
The cafe.